Okay.
Hello, a very warm welcome to the Essex Wildlife Trust annual general meeting today. I'm really thrilled to open the proceedings. Some of you know me, some of you may not. My name is Rich Yates. I took over from Andrew Impey at the start of the year, initially on an interim basis, and then more recently as the permanent chief executive. I'm absolutely delighted to be leading the trust over the next few years. I've worked at the trust since 2019. I'm a very proud Essex boy, and I have a lifelong passion for wildlife and the outdoors. So it's a real privilege for me. Now, 2024 is a special year for us. We were incorporated at County Hall on the 2nd of October, 1959, thanks to a group of pioneering men and women who had the foresight and the determination to establish a county-based trust to protect wildlife in Essex. So we're 65 years old in a couple of days, Wednesday, in fact, which is a cause for celebration. I've made the joke about reaching retirement age so many times already this year, so I'm not going to inflict that on you now. But if you were to read the letter, the original invitation to the inaugural meeting of the Trust, the ambition and intention back then is strikingly similar to what drives us today. Our articles of association have remained largely unchanged. Most of our strategies in the early 60s are as relevant now as they were then, creating nature reserves, working with landowners, playing a lead role in nature-based education, raising the profile of wildlife and the environment, giving evidence at public inquiries, and all of the campaigning, lobbying and advocating that we do as much as we possibly can. So in a world of constant change, the Trust really has remained resolute since the late 1950s. And we should all be proud that we are the latest incarnation of the Essex Wildlife Trust spirit. Speaking on behalf of staff, I know this is the case. I've never worked anywhere where there was such a strong sense of pride. I see my role very much as the guardian of that pride and spirit, as well as other qualities that our success depends on: the determination to make a difference, the determination to be good ancestors, and the determination to protect our wildlife and wild places and leave them in a better state than we found them in. Some things have changed since 1959, though. We are working from a much smaller base nationally. Many of our records are baselined in the 1970s and show striking declines in wildlife since then. And we're also working in an increasingly difficult political and economic environment. So for this reason, and to coincide with our 65th birthday, we are launching our latest conservation strategy, which sets out how we intend to reach our county target of 30% of land and sea in Essex actively managed for wildlife by 2030. And in it, we set out the contribution that we believe we could and should make, and where our priorities will fall over the next 5 to 6 years. This will be made available to you, hopefully within the next week, and I really hope that you enjoy reading it. We'll also be inviting you to submit memories for a virtual memory wall over the next year so that we can capture some of the best moments from the past 65 years. I'm now going to give you a very quick overview of today's proceedings. I'll shortly be passing over to our president, Professor Jules Pretty, who will be chairing the meeting. Jules is a familiar friend to many of us, a well-known broadcaster, author. He's the Professor Emeritus of Environment and Society at the University of Essex, and we are very proud to have him as our president. I've known Jules for many years, and he's always been a source of inspiration and support to me. Jules will be kicking us off with a short talk before he guides us through the formal business of our 65th annual general meeting. And then after Jules's talk, our Director of Conservation, Dr. Jeremy Dagley, who we all know as Jez, will be delivering his third State of Nature in Essex talk. This is our annual summary of the big wildlife trends in the county based on research from our own nature reserves. Jules will then take us through the business agenda, which will end with me answering some of the questions that you've submitted. There are too many questions for me to answer all of them within the time available, but I'll do as many as I possibly can, and we'll be answering all of them on the AGM webpage after the event for you to read at your leisure. After the Q&A session, we have some fantastic awards to announce, and then we're done for the virtual part of the day. However, this afternoon at 2 p.m, we're running free guided walks at all of our nature discovery centres to celebrate our 65th anniversary. So if you haven't already signed up for a walk near you, I would urge you to. You can book via the AGM webpage on our website. You can phone the centres as well, and there will be birthday cake. So without further ado, I shall pass over to Jules.
Thank you very much indeed, Rich. And welcome to everybody. A few words before Jez speaks, and then we get into the business, as Rich was just saying. So what I wanted to say today was something about shifting public opinion, which echoes this 65 years of change that Rich has just talked about. And something about the power of recovery, regeneration, renewal, and the role that the Trust has played has been not just in conservation of wildlife and nature, but in improvement, in making things better. And when that happens, surprising things can also happen that we didn't realize might be just around the corner. So 65 years ago, Trust was formed a couple of years after Fingering Hoe was the first reserve, a blasted landscape. I think it wouldn't be fair to call it a reserve at the time. But look at the transformation now. We saw the pictures of the nightingales just now in the video. And I'm interested in the power of story, how we tell stories to bring people together, to provide some form of inspiration. So here's one, short one. Once upon a time, a butterfly flapped its wings and everything changed across Eastern Europe. Erich Honecker, the leader of East Germany, said in 1989, early part of the year, the wall will stand for 50 years, and in 100 years too. By that August, it had fallen, and dramatic changes had occurred across Europe. And I was in Armenia in the early 2000s, a decade and a half after that, and it was clear that the industrial farms had been failing for a long time. We drove in my friend's tiny Trabant. It's kind of like a sewing machine on wheels, really, across a blasted landscape of broken farms and factories, no trees, slabs of concrete, roads buckled. It was hot. We stopped to buy watermelons from a roadside stall. And we came eventually to a place called Mira, a tiny eco farm, not far from Europe's oldest cathedral at Etchmiadzin, off-road in the Trabi, down to the farm. And there were orchard trees, corn and wheat, vegetables and mixed crops, willow trees and poplar, things that grew fast, a supply of irrigation water in old concrete channels, and 2 fish ponds in concrete pools. It was hot and humid, but the farmers had strung power to their fridge, and we sat at a picnic table and ate cold foods from the farm, types of cheese and yogurt and all kinds of salad. It was a kind of paradise. The sun came close to the horizon. We waited. 2 foxes came walking through the trees, their tails held high. And you know the fox is a trickster in many cultures, in many stories. Reynard and Reynardine in Europe, Inari in Japan. Foxes are clever and creative. They walked up to the ponds full of rainbow trout, looked up, and the farmers sat still, and one nodded to the foxes. And the foxes reversed, first the male and the vixen, and they dipped their tails in the water behind them. And you know what trout do when something comes to the surface of water. They snap. And the sudden thrashing of the water, snap, snap, and snap. A trout bit each tail, and the foxes flipped them over onto the ground in front of them. And the fish fell on the ground, and the foxes picked them up and looked again and walked away. So from renewal, from recovery, surprising things may happen. We may get a hint that it's not just us who's trying to save nature, but it could well be that the creatures are going to do their role in helping to save us from ourselves by making us see the world in a slightly different way. So I've reviewed recently the changes in public opinion in the past 5-10 years across UK and Europe in terms of climate, nature and environment. And there has been a really interesting, dramatic change. First, a thing, and I'll report on the numbers. And the thing is something called the Pareto effect, which is also called the 80-20 rule. Once you get 80% of a market or technology or public opinion or behaviors happening, you don't need to worry about the other 20% because systems flip and change by the 80% rule. So you just ignore the 20%, and now actually 80 becomes the point when you get regime shifts, flips of systems, these so-called tipping points. 80% is actually the target. Now, what's happened in public opinion in the last 5 years has been a shift of understanding of climate change and the need for nature recovery from around about 50 to 60% of the population in the UK and across the rest of Europe, and indeed in North America, actually, to around about varying between 70 and 80%, that magic 80%. People now understand, or they say this in public opinion polls, they understand that climate change is happening and that it's caused by human action. And this is actually quite a dramatic change because people have shifted from being skeptical about one or the other, or indeed both, to the point where it's heading towards 80%. Some countries, Italy, it's the highest in Europe, it's in the mid-80s% who understand that climate change is caused by humans. This is for all age groups in the UK. All voting groups are in the 70 to 80% range. So people in that area are supporting action on climate and nature, but they don't quite know what to do. So I have a separation of this 80%, this 20-80, into something slightly more complex. It's the 20-60-20 rule. The 20% of people in populations are already taking action and doing things. And I would hazard a guess that all members of the trust would fit into that starting 20%. The 20% at the other end are the agnostics or even the antis. And as I've said, one can ignore them in terms of encouraging systems to change. But it's the middle bit that I would call the climate majority or the nature majority. These are the 60% plus the 20, getting to 80, who understand things are happening, but they don't know what to do. So they are looking for guidance, for support, for reaching out to help them make the shift. And this is what I would make a call for in terms of a call for action, or call to action. Think about the middle 60%, talk to people, be kind, make them feel welcome. And this then will be our role as a trust and a membership to help make those tipping points towards whole systems changing, to what Rich said at the very beginning about our aim to support the county target of 30% of land and nature actively managed for wildlife by 2030. And 1 in 4 people in the county, a county of 1.4 million people, 1 in 4 people actively taking personal action to make things better. So it's very interesting that public opinion is suggesting that, and people are now waiting for institutions, individuals, families, communities, and others to help make that change. So that's my introductory remarks. So importance of storytelling, importance of renewal and recovery, and importance of reaching out to those who may not look as though they're on side, but they are, but they would like some help and support from us as individuals and us as institutions such as the trust itself. So now I hand over to Jez Dagley, Director of Conservation for the trust. And Jez, you're giving your State of Nature in Essex talk, which we've heard a couple of times before. Brilliant review of how things are across the county, particularly on data that we've been able to gather from reserves. So I'd like to hand over to Jez now before we come to the formal part of the proceedings in a moment or two. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Jules, and good morning, everybody. And I'll start with my first slide. Thanks, Thea. And I hope everyone can see that. And next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you today about data that we've gathered from by our talented conservation evidence and nature recovery teams across the county, but mostly on the nature reserves. And great thanks to them, but also to our nature reserve staff who are doing fantastic things on our reserves. And you'll see some of that evidence today. I'll start outside the reserve, so with dormice, the wonderful hazel dormouse, which Essex is an important county for. And this is showing 50 years of data on the map here. And what you can see is different coloured spots, with the black spots being the current status of the dormouse. You can see that basically the distribution hasn't changed hugely. There are some gaps missing, possibly a little bit of a decline, but nothing untoward. And rather wonderfully, the diagonal line that you see before you is a ghostly margin of the last glaciation, because that diagonal line of dots represents the sands and gravels, which of course were poured out of the last glacier, where it stopped in that line diagonally across Essex. So a rather wonderful ghostly image. However, what these data don't show is, and these are put together by Stuart Brooker, our senior ecologist, is that there has been a crash in abundance. And that's not just in Essex, but it's also nationwide. Not sure why yet, but we think as it's a climate change indicator, and that the dormouse is not doing well. So we'll do our very best on our nature reserves to design things to make it easier and better for these animals. But it shows that we need to work at a landscape scale to make them survive. Next slide, please. Then this massive array of dots that represents superb work by our Wilder Rivers and Protected Species Manager, Darren Tansley, along with fantastic volunteers that he and the RSPB have managed to get to map all the ponds that Essex had. Using Ordnance Survey First Edition maps, comparing them with recent aerial photographs, they found 16,000 ponds across Essex. And this map shows those ponds. And it also shows lost ponds, as we're calling them, in the black dots. And of that, next slide, please. You can see that 60% of those ponds have been lost, and probably very difficult to restore, but there may be some that we can. And there are only about 20% in green there that are in good condition still. But there are, nicely, 20%, about 3,000 ponds, which we can hopefully restore. And this map gives us the power to do that. We can locate where those are, and we can persuade and ask farmers if they want to do it. And the great thing is, the farm clusters we've got in the county, 3 very active ones, are really, really keen to do this. We've already restored over 50 ponds this year, but we're looking to get those 3,000 in the next decade. Next slide, please. And then we turn to our nature reserves. Here you see our wonderful habitat range that our nature reserves protect. Really wonderful array of habitats. And of particular note is the fact that we protect 10% of Essex's salt marsh. Next slide, please. So how do we monitor all this wonderful habitat, and what does it tell us about the state of nature? And I think we could perhaps start with what's in the news right now. You'll have heard about the butterfly emergency that the Butterfly Conservation Charity has declared. Really, really serious. The lowest number of butterflies ever counted in the survey's history. We are in a very difficult time, as Jules and Rich have both touched upon. What this shows, though, on the right-hand side is a grouped graph of our 26 species out of 35 that gives enough data, put together by Stuart Brooker, our senior ecologist, for the last 10 years on our nature reserves. And you can see there that the abundance is actually, if anything, going up, but it's probably not significant. But nonetheless, against the national trend of a massive decline in numbers, shows how important our nature reserves are. However, the picture, of course, is not uniform, as you might expect. If you look at the top picture on the left of the lovely yellow brimstone, that has been a success story over the last 10 years. It's increased on our nature reserves by 200%. However, the numbers of the ringlets, which is shown below, which are a lover of damp grasslands, the hot summers have not been so kind, and that's decreased on our nature reserves by 50%. Again, giving us an indication of what we might need to do to help that species survive. But overall, the picture of our nature reserves is really good. Next slide, please. Complicated diagram, don't expect you to look at all this, but to try and get across that we look at habitats in some detail. And here you see Harry Elliott, our conservation ecologist, very talented botanist, doing some work on wet grassland condition assessment. And what he's doing here is looking at 4 features, which you can see on the right-hand graph for Tollesbury Wick in particular. He's looking at the mean sward height, how tall the grasses are, whether there's bare soil for insects and invertebrates to burrow into, whether there's any surface water, which is of course important for our breeding waders, and how far you can push into the soil, which of course is vital for feeding birds to know what invertebrates they can get at. In the bottom corner on the left-hand side, that's all the reserves that we're doing this wet grassland survey on. And we at Essex Wildlife Trust support a huge percentage of our wet grassland of the whole county. Really important data that we're gathering here. On the right-hand side for Tollesbury Wick then, in detail, are showing differences between 2022 in orange and 2023 in blue. And as you can see, the graphs are going in all sorts of different directions. When we put the data together to create the overall assessment of wet grassland condition, we know that Tollesbury is not doing so well. And this is partly because of weather that's been very damp and difficult over the last couple of years, but also because grazing is not quite where we want it to be. So we're using this assessment work, we're able to mold and monitor and direct our grazing and management work slightly differently. And this is where evidence is so important to get our management right. The other reserves on the left-hand side are all improving. So it's Tollesbury where we need to focus in this particular year. Next slide, please. Now moving on to the wading birds that rely on that wet grassland. This is another complicated map. I hope you can all see it. It shows from the left to the right 3 years from 2022 to 2024 at Blue House Farm, which is the polygons that you see in the top of those maps. And what this shows is that straight line is the railway that cuts across Blue House Farm. And in 2023 we re-wetted it. We raised water levels across the site, below the railway there, south of the railway, and we also in that emboldened area put a fence around the fields of flat fields to protect them from fox predation. And what you can see is the numbers of birds have increased over those 3 years dramatically, and also moved southwards into the areas of protection and re-wetted areas. And 3 species stand out: lapwing, redshank, and avocet, shown in the pictures there. Lapwing and redshank have doubled in numbers, but avocets have extraordinarily increased 14-fold. A most magnificent response to the conservation work of the last 3 years, and a brilliant piece of work on our nature reserves. Really emboldened. Avocets are very important in the coast of Essex. Next slide, please. And similarly, we're also looking after our wading birds and our breeding birds on the ground on our sand and shingle. And at Tollesbury, but particularly at Colne Point, which are the pictures here, we have a fantastic site, the biggest sand and shingle site in the county, one of the most important on the east coast, and very important, as you can see here, for ringed plover breeding, the bird on the top left. Lovely species, which is really under threat from recreation, whether it's dog walking or sailing, people mooring their boats, having recreational activities across the shore, and also from fox predation and things like that. They're so exposed and so open on these tiny areas now that are left to them. So what we've done this year through Adam Nixon in our Marine and Conservation Recovery team is to put cages around them. And these cages are put over the eggs as soon as the eggs are laid, and don't seem to put the birds off. And what we've had is a fantastic response to that, with 1,000% increase in success in just 1 year in terms of what the ringed plovers have been able to breed. They've raised 33 young this year from almost nothing last year. Little terns, however, where we haven't yet managed to get a technique to work for them, have raised no young this year because fox predation got to them. They were unprotected, and you can see the kind of recreational disturbance they were also suffering. But a great success story through fantastic intervention work. And what it shows is that these pressures are not going to go away. In fact, if anything, they're going to increase. And so we need to be interventive. Next slide, please. And another bird that illustrates the importance of our nature reserves. Essex supports 25%, a quarter of the world population of dark-bellied Brent geese. What this slide shows is the importance of landscape scale conservation and partnerships. On the left-hand side, you've got Blue House Farm in blue and Lower Rapits on orange, 2 beautiful wildlife sites and nature reserves that we manage and look after on the River Crouch. One Blue House on the north side and Lower Rapits on the south side of that wonderful estuary. And what this shows is how important it is to monitor not just one isolated site, but several sites. And it shows here that actually Brent geese are doing okay. Brent geese are surviving well when you look at both sites together, but you wouldn't necessarily see that if you just looked at Blue House. But it gets across the point also that these are very highly mobile species that need to move around. You can't just protect one site, you need to protect many others. It's important that we have nature reserves in many places and work with our partners like RSPB, who also look after a site on the Crouch, which we know these geese use. Very important to get the data across this, and the data that's gathered by our ecologists isn't just on our reserves, but also coast-wide. Next slide, please. The last of the complicated slides, I hope, just 3 more slides to go, just to illustrate some fantastic work done by our Marine and Coastal Recovery team over the last 3 years, since 2021. They've looked at recreational pressures across the county at 14 different locations for where seagrass, which is the food of Brent geese and a vital species in its own right, that is now diminished to only 2% of the population it used to have and coverage of the coastline that it used to have. So it's really under threat, but yet it's a massive carbon store. It's an incredibly important species, not just for Brent geese to feed on, but for all sorts of things like seahorses and fish to breed in and shelter under. In looking at the seagrass and the recreational pressures on it, we've been able to engage citizen science volunteers who've been absolutely fantastic, and they've monitored these 14 sites with 6 surveys a year through July and August from 2021 through to 2024. And this, on the left-hand side, shows some of the data that's come from that. And this is particularly looking at moorings of boats, but there are 20 or so other recreational pressures they've also looked at. But I just wanted to show this sample from Leigh-on-Sea and Two Tree Island, just to give you a feel for where these data could be useful. And on the right-hand side, you can see the impact of boat moorings really affecting badly the seagrass. But we get this by providing this great baseline evidence. We're able to persuade and show, give evidence of how better to manage these. And there are solutions to this. There are better moorings that you can have which don't do so much damage. But this is great baseline data to persuade others like the sailors and sailing clubs and local authorities to bring in protection. Next slide, please. Last slide, 2 more slides, sorry, and I'll skip over this one very quickly just to say that we're embracing new technology through our GIS manager here, Charlie, with fantastic drone surveys, and I'll bring more of this news to you next year, I hope. Next slide and final slide, please. And this is really just a call to arms for all of you here, our great members and all your friends. Please do feel that you can respond to the Essex Local Nature Recovery Strategy. It's a bit of a beast of a consultation, but you only need to respond to the bits that you want to respond to. And the great importance of it is it's only the second local nature recovery strategy to be published, and by far the most comprehensive. And the UK government and Natural England, as the conservation agency, see this as a real exemplar strategy. We're very proud to have played our part in it. We're sitting on the board of the Local Nature Partnership, and it's a really fantastic strategy to respond to and get involved with. So please get involved, and thank you for listening. Thank you, Thea.
Thank you, Jez, and thank you, Jules. Before we start the business of the AGM, I'd just like to explain how the voting will work. You should have received an email in the last week or so with a link to the voting site, which is hosted by our partners, My Voice. If you have any problems at all, then you can contact My Voice by emailing the address on the screen just here. All voting will be via the My Voice voting site. For each voting item or items, Jules will read out the title of the vote, and a timer will appear on screen to indicate how long you have left to cast your vote. The instructions should be easy to follow, but do get in touch if you struggle. You'll need to select your choice, either for, against, abstain, and submit your votes, and the results will be announced shortly afterwards. If you've submitted a proxy vote already, then please avoid voting again if you can, so as not to skew the vote. And then, all being well, we'll announce whether the motion has been carried. So I will now pass across to Jules, who will chair the business section of the AGM. Thanks, Jules.
Very much indeed, Rich. And well, good morning again, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the 65th annual general meeting of the Essex Wildlife Trust. So thank you for attending, and thank you for all your support throughout the years. We've received a number of apologies, online votes and proxy forms. And so these votes have been checked and counted by our independent scrutineer, Penny Carter. And the votes she has counted and checked have been added to the online poll. And I will announce if each item has been passed after the voting, that the timing has clicked through. And we'll add them all together, and then I will let you know. So just bear with us for a few seconds after that point as we all the hard workers in the machine are doing the counting. So we'll begin with item 1 of the AGM. Ordinary business is the consideration of the minutes of the AGM held on the 7th of October 2023. So the minutes from 2023 were posted on the website. If you need to have a quick look, it's our website, Essex Wildlife Trust, wt.org.uk/AGM. and we ask you to vote to accept the minutes. So my voice, please would you display the timer and start the countdown for the first vote. As a member, I accept the minutes of the AGM held on 7th of October 2023 as a fair representation of the meeting. Please vote for, abstain, or vote against. Thank you. Super. So that should be the end of that vote, and I just await word. That has passed. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. I can confirm that that motion has been carried. So let's move to item 2 on your agenda, matters arising. I've been informed that there are indeed no matters arising. So if you do actually have any questions, and we're going to come back later after the AGM when Rich will answer some questions that have been submitted in advance. I'm going to pose them to him from members. But if in the meantime you have any other questions, then could you just use the question button at the bottom of your screen, pop them in, and we're actually going to report all the questions and the answers uploaded to the website after this meeting. We probably won't be able to get to any posed today, but let's see how that goes. So anything that relates to questions, pop them in there. Thank you. So consideration of the impact report is item 3 on our agenda. The impact report is available to read online, same place I just mentioned, /AGM on the website. Like most charities, the Trust has moved to an online format for the impact report, saves on costs, more environmentally friendly, but hard copies are still available at the Nature Recovery Centres, Nature Recovery, little slip there, that's interesting. Nature Discovery and Recovery Centres, NDCs. You can also call the membership office and they'll post you a copy free of charge. So if you'd like a hard copy, then just let us know, or just have a look at one of the centres, and we'll do that. But if you can manage online, that's super. The 2023 impact report focuses on some of the big projects that were achieved and implemented during the course of the year, including, as you've heard from Jez just now, restoring many hectares of wetland habitat, some amazing citizen science projects, including partnerships with my own organisation, the University of Essex, some significant work on blue carbon in the marine environment, that regeneration of seagrass meadows and salt marsh habitat, really critical alongside woodlands and alongside kind of sustainable and regenerative forms of agriculture that suck carbon into the soil. The blue carbon is definitely going to be one of our ways to address both nature and climate in the future. And working with over 40,000 children and families to give the next generation great wildlife experiences. I mean, this is fantastic work, I have to say. So all of this is in addition to the core business of managing nature reserves and working with landowners, as Rich was saying earlier on. And what underlines these successes is, of course, people of Essex, members and non-members. The Trust focuses on wildlife, but everything it achieves is through the people. And that includes especially you, our members. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to our Chair of Trustees. We're going to consider the impact report together with the report from Keely in a moment. To hand over to our Chair of Trustees, Keely Hazelhurst, who will take us through item 4 of the agenda, the consideration of the financial statements for the period of 2023. So although Keely is the Chair, she's come off the substitutes bench to do this report for us, because unfortunately Bob is unwell. But Keely will be able to cover this well. So Keely, handing over to you to take us through item 4 with a few slides as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Joel. Good morning, everyone. So, as Joel said, my name's Keely Hazelhurst. I'm the chair of the trust, and I am actually standing in for Bob Holmes today, the trust treasurer, who unfortunately can't be with us. So, I'll be giving you a brief overview of what's happened to the trust finances in 2023. You can find a more detailed presentation on the trust website, reached via a link on the AGM page. I hope some of you will have had the chance to have a look at this already. But for those who haven't and want to know more, please take a look once the AGM's over. So in summary, onto the detail now. In summary, the trust and its subsidiaries incurred a total deficit of £1.2 million in 2023, the same as in 2022. And as Bob has explained before, we've planned to incur operating deficits as the trust spends money to achieve its strategic plans. And this deficit was in line with the plan. As a result of the deficit, the group's net assets dropped to just less than £30 million, and cash reserves also decreased to stand at £1 million at the end of the year. We can have slide 1, please. The first slide summarises the income and expenditure of the trust last year compared with 2022. Income and costs both increased by £800,000, so our operating result was broadly unchanged at a deficit of £1.3 million in 2023, compared to £1.4 million in 2022. You can see that total income increased to £9.2 million. Income from grants and donations increased from £1 to £1.3 million, while legacy income doubled from £900,000 to £1.8 million. Both figures can vary significantly from year to year, as can income for supporting the management of the trust reserves, which at £400,000 was £500,000 less than in 2023. Less in 2023 than it was in 2022, although there was some change in categorisation due to the installation of a new finance system in the year. Membership income was more stable year on year and grew slightly to £1.5 million. Income from trading activities at the Trust 11 Nature Discovery Centres also increased from £2.4 million to £2.8 million as the impact of COVID-19 was finally overcome. The group's expenditure also rose by £800,000 to a total of £10.6 million. This included an additional £700,000 of expenditure on our core charitable activities, delivering more for wildlife as detailed in the impact report you'll have received. As sales at the NDCs increased, so did the direct cost of making those sales, which were up by £200,000. But that was less than the increase in this income, meaning that the sales company saw an increase in its profit last year. The Trust's ecological consultancy had a poor year, however, slipping from a small profit in 2022 to a loss of £100,000 in 2023. This slide also shows changes in the value of the Trust's long-term investments and pension liabilities. Investment markets had a better year in 23 than in 2022, and our investments increased in value by £700,000. Recovering some of the losses we saw in 2022. But we also have had to make provisions for additional costs we expect to incur for the RSWT pension scheme and to write down the value of a legacy property we acquired 3 years ago, which together cost £500,000. So overall, 2023 saw a further reduction in our funds, although not as big as the one we incurred in 2022. Move to slide 2, thank you. This next slide shows what happened to the Trust's cash balances in 2023. This year, the reduction in cash balances was very similar to the operating deficit. This is coincidental for the following reasons. Firstly, certain items of this year's incomes are not, certain items of the year's income and expenditure are not cash items. The unrealised profits or losses we record when the value of our long-term investments change is one example, as is the depreciation charge, which writes off against this year's results some of the amounts spent on fixed assets in previous years. There are also some items that go through our bank accounts that are not in the income and expenditure statement, such as what's spent on buying new fixed assets and the cash we draw down from long-term investments. The cash outflow of £1.3 million in the year depleted our balances, and with a further deficit expected in 2024, we drew down funds of £2.5 million from our long-term investments at the start of 2024 to top up our cash holdings, so they exceeded the minimum of £1.5 million that we've decided to hold under our reserves policy. Slide 3, please. slide shows the trust's balance sheet split according to the type of funds we hold. Our general and designated funds, the light green and blue segments of the pie chart, which together totaled 6.7 million, are unrestricted, meaning that they can be used for anything which is consistent with achieving the trust's charitable objectives. Within that total, designated funds are funds which have been earmarked by the trustees for specific projects. By contrast, restricted and endowment funds, the orange and dark green segments, which total £23 million, over 3/4 of all the funds we hold, have to be used for the specific purpose for which they were given to the trust. The big change in the figures in 2023 compared with 2022 is the decrease in general funds as a result of the deficit incurred this year. The figure remains twice the level of free reserves of £3 million that the board has set as the minimum it wishes to see held by the trust and its subsidiaries. Further decreases are expected in the next 2 to 3 years as a result of our strategy of running deficit budgets to deliver the corporate strategy while growing income and returning to a balanced budget in due course. Slide 4, please. And finally, I'd like to thank all of those who worked on the 2023 report and accounts. That's our Director of Finance and Systems, Sue Boswell, who unfortunately left us in August, Scott Parkin, Simon Bass, and all of the finance team, as well as the auditors at Price Bailey, who in their first year as our auditors have conducted a very thorough review. I'm pleased to report that the auditors have issued an unqualified report of the financial statements, which the Board of Trustees approved earlier this month. It only remains for me to propose the resolutions you see on the final slide. The first is that taking items 3 and 4 of the agenda together, the impact report and the audited financial statements for the year ended 31st of December 2023 are received. The second resolution is to agree that Price Bailey LLP should be reappointed as our auditors for the year ended 31st of December 2024, and that trustees are authorised to agree the auditor's remuneration. I'll hand you back to Jules to take you through the voting on these resolutions.
Thank you very much indeed, Keely. That was excellent, very clear and concise. So, members, I'd like to ask you, as Keely has said there, to vote on items 3 about the impact report and the first part of item 4 to receive the impact report and audited financial statements for the year ending 31st of December 2023. So my voice, please, would you display the timer and start the countdown for this vote? Thank you. Thank you. The moving blurred line on the pie chart has got to the end, so I'll just wait for the votes to be tallied. Yes, I can confirm that that has been passed. So thank you very much indeed. We will now move to items 4A and B, the appointment of the auditors, Price Bailey LLP, as the auditors of the trust for the year ended 31st of December 2024, and that their remuneration is decided by the trustees. So could we ask you to vote on items 4A and B, appointment of the auditors and remuneration decided by the trustees? Thank you again. Thank you. That's the 45 seconds up to end that vote. Yes, that's been passed. Thank you. Again, I can confirm then that Price Bailey LLP have been appointed as auditors and that their remuneration will be decided by the board. Thank you very much indeed. So we now move to item 5 on the agenda, the election of trustees. So there are 4 trustees standing for reappointment at this AGM: Bob Holmes, Ellen Simonson, Michelle Wall, and James Wren. The Constitution requires a proportion of the serving members to stand down each year, and therefore we've asked Bob and Ellen and James and Michelle to stand for re-election. Their biographies are available on the website, so you can read more about them there if you wish. We hope you'll support the board by accepting their recommendation to reappoint these individuals who are also members and who have an important responsibility, of course, of ensuring the good governance of the trust. So there's a nice slide of the pictures of everybody. So the poll for the 4 trustees will be shown on the screen here. There are separate polls, of course, for each, but they will be shown with the same kind of countdown here. So as a member, I approve the reappointment of Bob Holmes, Ellen Simonson, Michelle Wall, and James Wren as trustees of the trust. Could I ask you all to express your recommendations through the voting for, abstain, or vote against via the voting platform? And the counter this time will take 60 seconds for 4 votes. So you have to work a little bit faster, but it should be fairly straightforward. Thank you. Let's proceed. Okay, thank you. That's the end of the voting. Let's wait for the results to come through. I'm going to report on them all together. Good, thank you. I can confirm that all 4 former trustees have been reappointed, that you have approved their reappointment of Bob Holmes, Ellen Simonson, Michelle Wall, and James Wren as trustees. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. That is very helpful. So they are duly re-elected to serve as trustees on the board of Essex Wildlife Trust. So that confirms the end of the first section of the formal part, the ordinary business of the meeting of the AGM. So we now come on to the customary smallish piece of special business. And the special business is to vote to reappoint our independent scrutineer for a further 12 months. Penny Carter has acted as independent counter and arbitrator for voting. She has checked and verified the proxy voting for the last 6 years and has agreed to fulfill this role again for another year. So we'd like to ask you to agree to appoint Penny Carter as scrutineer for the Trust for a further 12 months. I'd like to ask you to express your voting once more then. Thank you very much. Thank you. The timer is finished. Super. So you have confirmed that we have a scrutineer for a further 12 months. That motion is passed. Thank you, Penny. We're very grateful to you. And that concludes the formal business of the AGM. So we now reach a point when we're able to ask Rich as the new chief exec of Essex Wildlife Trust to address some of the questions that we have had from members in advance of the meeting. If there are, as I said earlier, if you've got further questions, please pop them in the chat. We may not get to them because we've got some already kind of lined up, and we will work our way through these, see how this goes, but we will put all the questions that have been put in and all the answers on the website afterwards. They'll all be published, all the responses. So Rich, back to you again. Welcome. So the first question, just to confirm, I think you're on muted. So yeah, you knew that already. The first question is from Darren Parker. Thank you, Darren. Darren says, what happened to Andrew Impey, and why weren't we told of his departure in the magazine or told anything about his replacement, Rich Yates, which is you? So it's quite a kind of direct question. If you could just give us an answer to that one, then, Rich. Let's start with that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, yeah, thanks, Jules, and thanks, Darren. It's an important question, absolutely. So I appreciate you asking that. Andrew, he did write a letter to members that was published in the first magazine of the year, back in March, I think it was, and he had his reasons for moving, and so.
We've just got a little bit of breakup here, which has come at completely the wrong time, and Rich is now frozen on screen.
It's a real shift.
So Rich, you froze up in the middle of that. I'm really sorry to say. So could you just unwind and go back to Andrew writing a letter, because at that point it just broke up a bit and then you froze on screen.
Oh, okay.
So you weren't to know that because it would have looked good from your end, but sorry, that just came at the wrong moment. So
but
so
yeah,
of
course, Jules,
unwind to go back to that bit.
Yeah, so there was Andrew, he published a sort of an open letter in the first magazine of the year, which was back in March, and he did outline some of his reasons for moving on. And I was saying that we're very happy to send down a copy of that magazine if he missed it. And just to pay testament to Andrew, really, he was chief exec for 9 years. It's a long time to be the chief exec, and we're very grateful to him for his service. Did you get all of that clearly, Jules?
Yeah, I did. Brilliant. Yes, okay. I'd echo that as well. I think we all would say we're very grateful for all the service and leadership during that period, and indeed to you for stepping in so quickly earlier this year. So there was actually another question from Darren. He had two dips at this. He said last year we were promised an in-person members' day would return in 2024, at which there would be an AGM, but we're online again. So could you tell us why this is and why no explanation given in the magazine? Rich, if you could run at
sure.
that.
Yeah, sure, of course, yeah. Yeah, I think it's a very fair point, Darren. So again, appreciate you asking another candid and important question. It was our intention to have an in-person AGM this year. Unfortunately, we had to take some very difficult decisions, as many charities have. Many of my colleagues in other wildlife trusts and other charities have reported similar circumstances to us. But this is mostly based on the need to make financial savings, which included some redundancies. Unfortunately, it included withdrawing from some of our key activities, lots of cost-saving measures across the trust, and of course the change in leadership from Andrew to me, and other changes as well. So all of this contributed to a reduction in staff capacity and a reduction in and the need to reduce our expenditure. I did write to volunteers about some of these challenges early in the year, and perhaps there would have been some value in retrospect in sharing these circumstances with members as well. So that's something I can certainly consider in the future, Darren. This year, our compromise was to have a series of in-person walks to celebrate our 65th birthday after the AGM, and I'll say a bit more about that in a few moments. And that's intended to give members, staff, and the public the opportunity to celebrate together. But we will be working on an in-person AGM for 2025 from next week onwards. In fact, we've started the conversations about that already. So thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Rich. I mean, it strikes me as a not unreasonable compromise to have an online meeting, but make sure that there are opportunities for people to get together at each of the NDCs, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So thank you very much for that. A question from John Hall, a former chief executive of the trust, of course. So John was interested to ask about the plan for the future of Abbots Hall Farm, and when will the farm be reopened to members and or to the public? So if you could just give us a little bit of kind of background to that, and
Sure.
how things are looking for the future.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, George. Yeah, and thanks, John. And John was, of course, integral to many of or most of the early achievements at Abbots, and much of the pioneering work that we've done there. So it's great to get this question from John, and I benefited directly from some of John's background knowledge on Abbots a few weeks ago. Abbots Hall will be reopened to the public within the next 2 years. One new aspect will be the opening of the new King Charles Coast Path route that will run through the southern half of the reserve. The opening of the coast path will be the very latest that we will open the site publicly, and the aim is to provide other circuits as well for visitors to follow, with kind of views of the developing landscape of the old farm. The nature conservation plans for the farm are being formulated in detail at the moment, following consultation with lots of different experts in the county, particularly during 2023, that Jez kind of oversaw, alongside biodiversity net gain proposals and open woodland creation. We are developing ideas for flower-rich meadows, scrub mosaics, in particular, to support nightingales and turtle doves, wood pasture habitats, and more wetland expansion, sort of continuing the theme from the last 20 years. Insect conservation is a significant part of new plans as well, and we're intending that many rare bees, wasps and flies and other pollinators will benefit. I mean, in short, kind of Abbots will become a centre for scientific research and monitoring of nature conservation interventions, and that includes both citizen science and university-based science, both of which are already active, at the site. So it retains its position as a world-class site for pioneering projects, which I think has always been in the spirit of the site. and celebrates some of the recent and past successes, such as nature-friendly farming and the nature nursery. The site will also continue to be a focus for marine and coastal work, like salt marsh restoration, and build on the foundations of the great work of the managed realignment, of course, which will be 25 years old in 2027. And I know Jez is already planning the celebrations for that. So, yeah, thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rich. I was there on 2002 as the walls were breached, as people marched across the old. It was a lovely day. So yeah, very good. There was a similar question from Johnny Aldrich, who wanted an update on Abbots Hall Farm, and I think you've covered that very well. A question from Louise Ismail, and this is about, she says, is the nature reserve Iron Latch still run by Essex Wildlife Trust, or has it been completely taken over by Colchester Council? She then says, I'm worried that it could be built on, or if taken in by the council, is in this kind of green belt, grey belt debate around opportunities for rebuild. So if you could say something about Iron Latch then.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jules. Thanks, Louise. Iron Latch, very dear to me. I'm a serial participant on the bat and glowworm walks. The trust still owns and manages the Iron Latch Nature Reserve, which is adjacent to the new Iron Latch Wood site, which I believe is now in the ownership of Colchester City Council as part of a Section 106 planning agreement with the developer. The trust's nature reserve is not under any direct threat. However, increasing residential housing will continue to put pressure on the reserve. As with many other reserves around the county, not just our own reserves, but other reserves. So we will continue to work in partnership with local authorities like Colchester to ensure that they develop their local plans with the enhancement of biodiversity as a top priority. Just to pick up on Jez's earlier point, Louise, as a member, one of the ways that you can help, as well as remaining sort of vigilant about your own local green spaces, is to respond to the local nature recovery strategy, which we've been heavily involved with. The consultation, as Jez said, is happening at the moment, and through that you can push for joined up thinking on site protection and new places for wildlife to be created, in the face of increased development. So that would be my suggestion to you, Louise. Thanks, Jules.
Yeah, good suggestion, Rich. Thank you very much. Graham Mee has asked, why does the Southend and Rochford group and their talks and walks not appear on the main website?
Thanks, Graham. Apologies for this. It's likely to be because the Southend, Rochford and Castle Point local groups, so the previous Castle Point local group has merged with the Southend and Rochford local group. But it's newly re-established. It was dormant for a short period, which is great news. Our local groups are very important to us, and I think we've done a lot of great work with local groups over the last couple of years, and it feels like they're starting to thrive. So they should appear. I shall work with Graham Cook, Gary, and the rest of the local group to ensure that this is resolved over the next few days. So thank you, Graham.
Bob, thank you. Pam Freer has submitted a question. Will you please start sending out local group newsletters to all the local members who have emails, so that the local group meetings and other activities have a chance of being better attended? The amount of space allowed to local groups in the magazine is not sufficient for this purpose. So these are obviously related to kind of engaging with local groups. Yeah, have a run at that.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. Pam, a local group committee member, very important for the trust, Pam. So nice to get a question from you. Thank you. I've committed recently into looking into this actually. So I will. I committed to doing this at one of our local group forums. The transition to including local group news and events in the magazine was intended to bring local groups into the heart of the organisation and for everything to feel more integrated, as well as to save time and money and to reduce the environmental impact of, having a separate publication essentially. I think we've come a really long way with our local groups, and it feels like they are integral to the trust, which is, where they should be, it should feel that way. But there are still things that we want to improve. So I will certainly look into this. I think enabling our local group committees to email members has been a step in the right direction, but I know that you need more tools, Pam, available to you in order to communicate with members. So yeah, we will certainly look into this.
Good. A good question from Jacqueline Beer. As a member of Essex Wildlife Trust and a keen follower of the progress of the private members' climate and nature bill, hopefully working its way through Parliament at the moment, I would be really very interested to hear how the Trust are or are planning to support this bill. So this raises a kind of wider question about engagement with kind of political regulatory change within government. But this is specifically about this particular bill. So
yeah, okay, yeah. Thanks for submitting the question, Jacqueline. Lobbying and advocacy are really important parts of what we do. We're lucky to have some really fantastic staff who are working constantly on lobbying and advocacy and responding to planning as well, and our local groups as well often feed things through to us, which is particularly helpful. We're trying our best to have influence nationally as well as locally and regionally. The bill that you mentioned had its first reading on the 21st of March, and we have been following its progress. Because it was a private members bill, it wasn't carried into the new Parliament, and therefore has to be reintroduced in some form. There have been several new private bills, members' bills that have been tabled in the current Parliament, and one of these is the Environmental Targets Bill, which is probably the closest comparison. We are likely to make a collective response to this bill as the Wildlife Trusts nationally, and Essex Wildlife Trust will also discussing the implications of the bill with our colleagues, our neighbouring colleagues in the Wildlife Trust movement. So it's a case of watch this space really, but certainly the original bill we were supportive of.
very good, yeah, thank you. A question from Councillor Richard Everett. Tendering District Council Planning Department are, he says, increasingly not requiring proper reports for protected species. So this is resulting in information that could save protected species from being adversely affected by development not being collected, that's the information, and in turn protected wildlife being damaged. So what can be done by the Trust to help protect our wildlife from decisions made in the kind of planning arena? I think I would put it that way.
Thanks, Jules. Yeah, and thanks, Richard, for submitting that. Planning is such a crucial issue in our county. I often talk about us being seen as the residential county, and we've got I think two or three of the fastest growing towns in the UK in Essex. So it really is a big issue, and we need to do everything that we can collectively and individually to ensure that the right developments happen in the right place. We're engaging regularly with Tendring District Council on a number of key planning matters. One of those includes the protection of the internationally important Stour estuary or Stour, depending on which side of the river you stand, which is a special area of conservation. There are other planning matters that mean that we are in regular contact with the planning officers at Tendring, and we're also aiming to meet them before the end of the year. In fact, the Tendring planning officers to discuss nature recovery, at scale in the district, to have that kind of discussion in the round. So again, Richard, it's a kind of case of watch this space really, but it's a good point.
Related to this, a question from Edward Barrett on Middlewick, on the Middlewick Ranges. So of course the City Council now. Middlewick Ranges, as many of us will know, is an extraordinarily valuable wildlife site in South Colchester, and yet the Middlewick Range remains in Colchester City Council's local plan for housing development, currently on the market for sale. So what further steps does the Wildlife Trust propose to take, or is able to take, as it were, to protect Middlewick from development?
Thanks, Jules. Yeah, thanks for raising this, Edward. We are actively campaigning with other nature conservation organisations, along with the Friends of Middlewick, to have the housing allocation completely removed from the Colchester local plan. We met planning officers in person back in May, following detailed correspondence with them. We've also written a joint letter with our campaign partners to the landowners, which is the MOD, to make it clear that their position is, in our view, not defensible, because it conflicts with their own biodiversity strategy, among other things. We will be sending another letter to Colchester City Council in the next week or so, and seeking a further in-person meeting with them, highlighting further key evidence which we believe makes the case for saving Middlewick, incontestable. We're also engaging with 2 local MPs and local councillors with a keen interest in the protection of the sites, and we'll be having in-person meetings with them soon. So there's lots of work that we're actively doing to try and support Middlewick.
That's great. Just a couple more questions that we will take before we move to the next stage. So a question from Joan Pinch. As a retired member of reserve staff and having been concerned during the last few years at the dwindling numbers of staff left to maintain our nature reserves, I would be pleased to hear positive plans for the future to maintain these important holdings.
Thanks, Jules. Are you retired, Joan? I think it's one of those you just moved from being a salaried member of staff to a volunteer, but probably doing just as many hours. Yeah, it's really good to get a question from Joan. She's been a key part of the trust for many years, and also happens to be a fantastic baker of cakes. The challenge of managing large land holdings in the face of rising costs is an issue for all conservation charities. We feel it acutely at Essex Wildlife Trust. What we're looking to do over the next few years, and we've got a new commercial director who's going to be joining us, Ben, in a few weeks' time, is to make the most of the opportunities presented by green finance, such as biodiversity net gain, as well as increasing the amount of agri-environment grants that we're eligible for. And the idea is to realise the full income potential, or the full income generating potential of our sites, so that we can cover the cost of managing them properly, Joan, and ideally get to the point where each reserve is financially sustainable. This obviously depends on many factors, but we'll do our best to ensure that staff in our nature reserves remains a top priority. It's the foundation of our work, so it's always the first. It's always the first priority on the list, really. So yeah, thank you, Joan.
Super. And then finally, in this part, a question from David Stevenson. It would be helpful if local centres advertised events more widely and advertised events on the members' email. So I think this kind of relates to earlier how we engage with members and others about events, and also things happening at local centres. So
yeah, thanks, Jules. Yeah, thanks, David. It's a really good question. It does. As far as I'm aware, it does happen in many centres, but perhaps not routinely. So what I would commit to is looking into how we can increase this and make it more of routine practice. I certainly would like our events and our local group events to be advertised as widely as possible. So I shall look into that, David. Thank you.
Very much indeed, Rich. And I'm going to, because of the timing, I'm going to propose that the 4 questions that have been posed to us at the meeting are then addressed and published on the website. And I'd just like to thank Carol Hills, Lynn Henderson, Jane Giffords, and Sue McClellan for posting questions and comments about Epping, about nature discovery centres, and their various uses, about the benefits of an online AGM, just kind of setting it's more an observation, and Sue talking about local groups again, which is kind of related to a couple of the questions there. But we will answer each of those specifically on the website, and get back to each of you as well, so that that is there. Thank you very much indeed. That's super. Thank you, Rich, for answering all of those. So now I turn back to you, pass the baton over to you for the final part of the AGM, the awards and good news stories from a number of members, supporters, staff and others, the Wilder Essex Awards. So turning back to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jules, and thanks for being such a great chair for another year. It really is appreciated, and we're very lucky to have you. Now, this is one of my favourite parts of the AGM, the Wilder Essex Awards. These awards go to individuals and groups who are helping to bring the vision of a Wilder Essex to life. You know, winners and nominees really are some of the county's heroes. So people who are worth celebrating. The first of this year's awards is the Wilder Communities Award, which goes to a community or an individual who's shown real commitment to wildlife and the environment in their local area. And I'm pleased to announce that Claiborne Community Gardens are the recipients of this award for 2024. Claiborne Gardens are a group of residents who've created a wonderful community garden on the grounds of their residential estates. Initially starting with a single individual who reached out to the local council for planters, compost bins and a wormery, I believe. The group and space have flourished into a social hub for residents with an ever-growing mix of important habitats for wildlife. The group has collaborated with us at the Trust on many levels, not just our community team and the Wildlife Trust national programme, Next Door Nature, which some of you may know about, but also through our training award scheme, which involves training individuals in ecological skills in order to upskill the community, which is funded by DP World. So really thrilled to award this to Claiborne Community Gardens. Well done. So our next award is the Green Leader Award, for an individual who is inspiring others and leading the way in terms of conservation and climate. And it gives me great pleasure to award this to Alex Holliman. Alex is the Managing Director of Climbing Trees, who are a leading business for ethical and environmentally driven marketing and communications based in Essex. And Alex was also instrumental in securing funding for our Fir Tree Wood land appeal, as well as being a very strong general advocate for the Trust. So congratulations, Alex. Thrilled that you're the recipient of the award this year. Okay, next up is our Wilder Business Award, which is awarded to a corporate partner or a local business that shows an exemplary commitment to supporting wildlife. And this year's winner is, and I'm just going to have a sip of water, Essex and Suffolk Water. Essex and Suffolk Water are long-standing supporters of the Trust and make a huge contribution at both of our reservoir sites, Hanningfield Reservoir and Aberton Reservoir. At a time of significant scrutiny on water companies, Essex and Suffolk Water regularly score highly in Ofwat regulator tables and are currently doing a lot of work on water scarcity, which aligns with our own work to protect water supply and to protect our catchment areas. It's you know, it's great for us at the Trust to be able to work with a conservation-minded water company, which you know, certainly is the case with Essex and Suffolk Water. So a big congratulations to everyone at the team there. Good. And the final award is the Ray Marsh Award, which is presented each year to one of our outstanding volunteers for significant services to the Trust. This is the award that you know, this is the award that we're most fond of at the Trust. And I should say that all of our volunteers are amazing and worthy of an award. However, you know, we can't unfortunately give out 1,700 awards. So this year we have received some incredible nominations, and I wanted to commend in particular Sylvia Jiggins at our Phyllis Curry Reserve and Bob Reed at Shorebridgeworth Marshes for their work over the Trust for many years. And myself and the executive team are hoping to go and see Sylvia and Bob over the next couple of months to thank them in person. However, it gives me great pleasure to announce that this year's recipient of the Ray Marsh Award is Steve Spicer. Steve is a real legend in the Danbury area. He's tirelessly committed to Danbury Ridge and played a very prominent role in supporting our Fir Tree Wood appeal, which undoubtedly contributed to its success. Steve first started volunteering with the Trust around 10 years ago as the warden for Pheasant House Farm. The farm had been vacated by the tenants, and Steve put in an extensive programme of wildlife improvements around the farm, including planting new hedgerows and a new orchard. And Steve has been running regular Thursday work parties at the farm ever since. He's developed his role over the years, but he's been a volunteer and is now the main lead for all of the Danbury volunteer wardens, and coordinates the winter work parties across the whole ridge, which is a significant expanse of reserves. Steve's Thursday work parties are happy to help across the whole ridge, and most recently helped to install some really important new posts and rail fencing at the Little Baddow Heath part of the reserve, using our own grown and harvested sweet chestnut wood. Steve's also been keen to take on new projects to help deliver all of the wildlife improvements across the ridge. Most notable in recent times, there's a few examples I could give, but was a total revamp of the Danbury Ridge Nature Trail. Steve worked with John Story and Lauren Cossum to rewrite the Nature Trail. He helped to produce the new interpretation and then put all of the waymarkers and information boards on site, and it's a huge expanse of reserves. On top of his dedication to Danbury, Steve has also been a fantastic ambassador for our Fir Tree Wood Appeal over the last year. He's encouraged people to get behind the campaign and has been a great support to fundraising, not least in being a sounding board as the campaign developed, giving his views in a frank but fair way that Beck, our head of fundraising, has really valued. He's been incredibly responsive and often fronted that campaign, talking to passers-by and the community about the appeal. He's also given up his time to lead guided walks for our donors at the weekends and in the evenings, and is known for creating events that have real kind of warmth and are accessible, friendly, and relatable. He's a real asset to Essex Wildlife Trust, professional and always keen to help and support. So a huge thank you to Steve from all of us at the Trust for your fantastic commitment, and congratulations on receiving the Ray Marsh Award. Okay, that just about brings us to a close for today. I'd just like to make one final announcement to members as part of this year's AGM. As some of you know, back in January last year, the writer Ronald Blythe passed away at the age of 100. We have been fortunate enough to be left Ronnie's house, Bottom Goms, along with some restricted funds, in order to ensure that Bottom Goms continues to inspire generations to come, just as it inspired its past inhabitants, which included artists John and Christine Nash, who lived there prior to Ronnie. Ronnie was an internationally renowned writer, not least as the author of Aikenfield, which just happens to be one of my favourite books from when I was a teenager, and we will do our very best to do justice to his gift. We're already working with Ronnie's friends and the executors of his will to develop a vision, and you'll no doubt hear more about this from us in the months ahead. So it's a really exciting prospect, and we wanted to share that with you today. So it only remains for me to thank Jules once again, and also to thank My Voice for hosting this event, as well as Keely and Jez and all of the team behind the scenes, particularly Deb Hart and Karen Kendon, and of course our wonderful scrutineer Penny. More importantly, I would like to thank you, our members, trustees, local groups, volunteers, supporters, corporate members, partners, legators, and our funders. We're lucky to have such an amazing spread of different people that work with us. Without you, none of our work would be possible, and we cannot overstate our thanks. Please do, if you're able to, join us on one of our birthday walks this afternoon, and please do read through the impact report. Those successes are yours to enjoy. Otherwise, I shall bring the AGM proceedings to a close for 2024. Thank you for listening. If you can, stay online just for a few more minutes to enjoy some of our favourite video footage of wildlife in Essex over the past year or so. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.